So it's over to you, sire.
Over to me. Oh, okay. Well, there was two things, I guess, that I was sort of had been exercising my mind from our last conversation. The first of them was I was just trying to get clear in my own head, to be honest with you. Like there's been a lot of discussion, and including ourselves, about what happens next. But I guess what I wanted to do in the first instance, even just for my own benefit, was to say, okay, well, to work out what happens next, I've got to sort of have a clearer view about where we've come from. And so that's why I sort of quite pleased with myself, actually, that I got it down onto a single page. But so I was just sort of thinking about looking forward with a conscious and creative business context. There were three sort of key contexts for me. There was service to humanity and living things, zero harm for people and planet, and what I've called the 3E net gain. So effective, efficient, and enhancing. So trying to sort of say, okay, these are sort of the broad brush sort of context looking forward. But in terms of looking back, and I've just sort of put that sort of table there that I sent through to you, which we can maybe include in the video or separate to the video. And really what I was trying to do is just sort of say, well, where has business come from? Like what's the journey of business? So I sort of, in the left-hand column, put down just a range of key, headings. So, the purpose, the company, currency, investment, production, marketing, communications, land and resources, scale, optimized for, and spirit. So for the purposes of the video, I'd like to, give an example. Like, so the purpose of a business, like 1,000 years ago, and the time frames I've sort of put there sort of a bit arbitrary, but I reckon like from the year 1000 BC up to about 1300 BC, the purpose of a business was to, subsistence, to basically help you survive. And it might be like a market stall or something. I mean, there's lots of examples. Whereas from 1300 to I think roughly about 1990, I characterise as like the industrial period. So the purpose of businesses over that time frame was always this sort of growth. We've got to grow, this eternal growth. We've always got to get bigger, bigger, bigger. Bigger is better, type mindset. And then from the 90s through to pretty much now, we've seen these other businesses emerge, particularly in the digital realm, where it's not only just been about growth, but it's just been about, growth beyond imagination, exponential growth. It's so, like if in the industrial period, the growth curve was, it was like that, from the 1990s and Amazons and those sort of things, the growth curve was like this, virtually straight up, beyond a lot of people's imagination as to the rate and amount of growth of those businesses over their life. And then I've sort of postulated, then looking beyond here, what might the purpose of a business be? And I've sort of speculated that it's probably going to be about sustainable prosperity, which is a completely different context from what we've seen in the past. So as you work your way down through that table, like for, the company structure, for example, back in the 1300s, it was typically a family business. And then in the industrial age, it sort of morphed into like a chartered monopoly or a corporation. Then in the digital industrial age, the 90s to up till now, it was about platform monopolies, so Amazons and Ubers and those sorts of people. Looking forward, I think it might be morphing into platform cooperatives, which has a completely different context. And you'll see that theme all the way down. So the currency, so back in the 1300s, around that era, there was a market money. So the idea of the currency was to support the trade. In the industrial age, there was central currency, which is about supporting banks. It was all about the banks, has been for, the last 1,000 years, probably. Oh, no, maybe not that long. Then in terms of the 90s to the 2020s sort of thing, it's all just been about these, derivative instruments. So about leveraging debt, and all of those sorts of things. So a lot of these companies had no asset values in the material sense. It was all just, imaginary value in that sense. Looking forward, I'm sort of suggesting it's probably going to be like cryptocurrencies or platform to platform type currency exchanges, which is more about sort of promoting circulation of wealth rather than just sort of flowing into the pockets of a few. So if you look at like the investment model, back in the 1300s, it was about direct investment in the business. In the industrial age, it was all about stock markets. In the industrial age, the digital industrial age, it all became about algorithms, ironically. But looking forward, I think it might be more about crowdfunding, so people supporting, the businesses from a diverse base for different reasons. And I've worked my way down the list, like through production. Did you want me to go through them or?
Yes, definitely. I want to hear your
Okay.
your thinking on this.
Yeah. So from a production perspective, in the early days it was about handmade. So if you use the written word or as an example, because it's been in so much of human history. So the handmade would have been the equivalent of like a manuscript. In the industrial age, it sort of became mass produced, so like the printed book. In the digital age, from the 90s, it all became about files, so non-tangible things. And looking forward, I think it might be more about, the wiki type concept. So, that open source, everyone sharing and contributing type mindset. From a marketing perspective, back in the 1300s, it was about the human face, about, John the barber or Fred the butcher or whoever. Then as we moved into the industrial age, it became about branding, about brands. And then as we've moved into the digital, the 1990s, it's all about big data. It's about predicting what customers want. So the brand wasn't as important. It was more about if I've got the information, then I can predict where the next big thing is going to be. And you see that through like the ideas of like Shopify and those sorts of platforms where it's all about trying to predict where the next fad's going to be so you can jump on it and exploit it. And then in terms of looking forward, I think it's going to be more about that collaborative, approach. And I'm sorry, in terms of the marketing looking forward, I think it's going to be more about, utility and the legacy of the business. So the values of the business and the attributes of the business and ethics and those things, I think are going to become more and more important in terms of, who do I choose to spend my money with? And I think I pray that it's just going to be more about, businesses, ethical businesses and those sorts of things. From a communications perspective, 1300s was all about personal contact, who I actually spoke to. As we moved into the industrial age, it became about mass media. So, newspaper advertising, magazines, and then television and those things. As we moved into the digital industrial, like from the 1990s, it all became about apps and the internet. And as we look forward, I think it's going to be more about networks. So it might be a little bit about, with the risk of sort of becoming jargon, it could be more about sort of neural type networks of like-minded people and those things. Land and resources, back in the 1300s, it was all about the church commons, because the church was the big feature of the land in those days, and as, depending on the country, but in the industrial age, it was all about colonization, and then the digital and industrial was very much about privatization. So taking, stuff that's normally done by governments and public authorities, privatizing it, making it for profit. But looking forward, I think we might be going back into not so much the church commons, but more like a public sort of commons. So the land and resources are there for the public good rather than just for the hands of the few. In terms of wages, 1300s, you were paid for value. So if you were a craftsperson, it was paid for the value that that you brought to the business. In the industrial age, it was about you're paid for your time. So as an employee, in the digital and industrial age, and you and I are acutely aware of this, it was either not being paid or being underpaid, like as an independent contractor. The time and effort and talent that you brought to businesses was certainly recognised. And then looking forward, I'm sort of thinking it might be more of a value exchange type model where you're a member of the community and you share in the fruits of whatever that business might be as a member of that community. So if you look at the scale of the business, 1300s, it was all just about local. It was about my village, my patch. Then in the industrial age, it tended to go to more of a national type focus. So how big is my business within the country? In digital industrial, it was always, global markets. Think globally was always the catch cries there. And looking forward, I think it might be more of what I've termed as strategically bounded. That is, you focus on where you want to focus. It's not all about bigger is better. And that's a theme that I think you've enunciated very, very well as, in one of your videos there just the other day. So in terms of the optimization of the business, in the 1300s, it was all about creating value. In the industrial age, it was all about extracting value. And I almost couldn't believe my own eyes when I sort of thought about it and wrote it down on a piece of paper. I've sort of known it, but I've sort of, till it hits you in the face. If you look at the digital industrial age, it's actually about the destruction of value. So if you look at, like, for example, Uber, for example, might be a typical example of that. They see themselves as a market disruptor, but it's more than disruption. It's actually destruction. So, they'll destroy an existing industry for their own benefit. And a lot of the online shopping platforms very much unashamedly that too. Don't go to the retail store, buy from us. We'll sell it to you cheaper. We don't have the overheads, rah, 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 rah. But in terms of the community impact, with the local store, they're fast, gone away because the value that they had in their businesses has just been destroyed. And looking forward, I'm inclined to think it's going to be more about exchanging value, and again, consistent with that theme that I've been sort of advocating there. And then the final heading I put there is spirit, because I think it's a constant. Spirit never changes, but the spirit of the business back in the 1300s was about building trust. So, do the people in my village of what trust me to be a good baker or a butcher or whatever. In the industrial age, I think it became more about belief. What we believed to be appropriate or good, and that was sort of manifested through consumerism. The people believed that the definition of success was a flashy car and a certain label on the shirt that you wore and stuff like that. And in the more recent times, the 1990s to 2020s, I think it's all been about ego. It's just like ego out of control. It's just, it's in my view quite evil in many respects. But anyway, but then in terms of looking forward, I think that we are going to see the shift back into a more spirit-led thing in the context of what I've sort of termed as understanding. And I talked about that, I think, last week, about what understanding is. And it's more of a going back to a faith based on trust, being led by spirit. So I think that was kind of where I sort of see those sort of pathways across each of those headings. And I'm sure there's other headings that we can put there as well. But for me, part of my discipline was trying to keep it on a single page and cover those broad areas and that. And then the other one that I sent through to you today was just about how I saw change occurring. because when you look at where we're at, like right now, like in this digital industrial age, where there's massive amounts of wealth in the hands of very few, like making the transition from there to, where there has to be a distribution of wealth and a redistribution of power, that's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky and potentially very messy, because if you look back over the history of like even just business, when change occurred, rarely, or perhaps maybe never, the change occurred not by a consensus. It was more of a revolutionary act, or an act that occurred as a result of, like economic crashes or, those sorts of things. So the change was something that was sort of forced in many respects. And lo and behold, here we are with this virus, and, as a catalyst for change, like we're not sort of moving into, hopefully, this this sort of where people matters type mindset on the basis of, hey, this is a really good time and it's, we want to do this, blah, blah, blah. No, it's about, we've had a pandemic which has changed the way that we do things, and we have to change. So once again, we're sort of being forced to change. And that provides, another T-junction where, we can use this as an opportunity to build a conscious and creative business context, or we can jump off the cliff and launch ourselves into chaos. And I think they're the sort of pretty much the extremes that we're confronted with at the moment. So in terms of the change process, and maybe we can talk about that in a few moments, that's kind of, I guess, what was exercising my mind in terms of what the new business might look at. And I think that, some of the comments that you've made through your recent videos there about small is beautiful and big is not better, and that sort of stuff, in my mind anyway, they dovetail perfectly within that little roadmap of where we've come from and so where we might be going. Kind of, I guess, a quick overview of, I guess what I was sort of saying there. So, I don't know. Did you want to maybe share some of your thoughts about those issues?
Yeah, I must first congratulate you on really. It's interesting. You think very differently than I do. Okay, when you're thinking about this very, very differently, and so I guess it's hard for you to actually empathize with my thinking because it's so different to your thinking, and what you've put up here is really spot on. I mean, I must congratulate you on. I've been looking at the chart while you've been talking, and yeah, whereas my approach is, as you know from my videos, and is really different. And maybe we'll come back to the theme of this talk, which you wanted, which was how to transform from the existing to the new. I think you've clearly indicated on your chart which was and that is, what is the existing? Okay, and that's quite easy to define, which you've done, okay, with great detail and accuracy. What's the new is impossible to even talk about, I believe, until we look at what is bad about the pre-2020. Okay, what is bad about our existing setup, and before we just make assumptions and start thinking about a transfer. A transfer to what? So for me, the problem, first of all, is more philosophical, and the move to the new is philosophical. So I think the philosophical, because there's confusion in the world, and possibly confusion in your and my minds as well. And then there are convictions and beliefs in our minds as well. And even going back to absolute basics and fundamentals, we have like two streams of history, which is just on, let's say, religions, where religions, we're saying that there was creation, and then on the other side, when the non-religious people was, we just are what we are, and we here by chance, and so forth. So take that to every aspect of society. We have that. Okay. Now, with technology, okay, that's and one can take a whole lot of things, because technology in its own right, as I said in my video, my little blog, that technology is good, and it's only good if it builds the self-esteem and even the pride, but the skills of a worker. Okay. Now, what technology has done through human skills, okay, it's degraded the human. Okay, he goes to a factory, and he puts on some nuts and bolts on something, and that's what he does, and then he goes home, and he doesn't feel any satisfaction. He doesn't feel like he's achieved something. He doesn't feel creative. Okay. And so that is perhaps the bad side. So this big is bad is definitely, it is because it degrades the human, and we can't. Okay. It strips him of dignity. Okay, and it robs him, of all sorts of things. It robs him of ability just to work and feel fulfilled and creative in his work. Okay, but technology is important, in order to help him do his work. For example, if he was a woodworker or something, he was perhaps using paper to smooth something over. Now he's got technology that he can either put it through a machine and sandpaper it, or hand hold a sandpaper. That's good technology in my and that's what I call sort of like intermediate technology, because the next step up is it goes to a factory and it all gets done in the factory, and he pushes the buttons and carries it to the stockpile or something. So for me, that before we can envisage what the new is, I think we need to find out all the things that are bad from the past. Technology has been de-skilling workers. Okay, and workers need to be continuously skilled and upskilled using a technology that helps them do that, rather than takes away their skills altogether that they could have. I don't know if any of that makes sense.
I think the other piece I would add to that, Mike, is even from the broader community perspective on how businesses are operating. Before the advent of the internet and social media and all of those sorts of things, and you and I, because of our age, can understand this perfectly because we've experienced it. When you were a young lad at school, or maybe when you just finished school, and there's this, and let me create a mythical character. So his name is Bob, and Bob's got some outlandish ideas, that he's trying to advocate to, the circle of people that are around him in, say, 1965. Okay. And basically, that small circle of people, I can imagine you sort of saying, Bob, you're a bloody idiot, piss off. And so Bob, oh well, and he picks up his ball and he trots off home with his head down. The trouble is, or one of the challenges is that since the 1990s, Bob can go onto the internet and he can in effect force his views into the mainstream with very little effort, really. And I'm not saying Bob's views aren't right or wrong or whatever, but the fact of the matter is the audience can get very confused and they don't quite understand what the truth is. And you can see it with the advent of conspiracy theories and even maybe the super wealthy. It's in their interest to spread some of these conspiracy theories and misinformation or whatever, because it preserves their position of power. So from a broader community perspective, you have these dilemmas that you look at these conspiracy theories or these sort of marketing campaigns or propaganda campaigns, and they're done so professionally and so well, and you can find yourself questioning, like, how is this a good thing? Like when I sort of sat there, like the real sort of wet fish in the face for me was, when I was looking at the value side of the equation of business, and I'm thinking, how on earth for the last, since 1990s, like for the last 30 years, why has it been okay to systematically destroy industries? And industries are not faceless things; they're people. It's people's livelihoods. It's communities. It's the economic wealth within in geographic locations and that. How has that been okay? Oh, because you can buy this article of clothing which you need to have if you want to look cool, cheaper from me or you can't get it from anywhere else, or what, all that nonsense, which is that morphed into that hyper consumerism. And where's the truth? And how do you discern the truth? Because there's such powerful and persuasive messages, they really are. So for people like you and I, where in 1965 it would have been, piss off, Bob, you're an idiot. In the year 2020, you can't say that because you just don't know. And that's one of the challenges that we've got. So it's not only about the technology degrading, the value of the work that people do, but I think it's also provided a platform for people to get anything out there, and they can be the most confusing messages around, and it's really difficult to discern whether it's true, because you get this mass followings in a heartbeat sometimes. That when something goes viral, it can do that within 24 hours. It can do that in no time flat. So it's almost the inverse reverse of what you and I might have done to Bob in 1965. He's virtually, this mythical Bob is doing it to us, virtually within the same sort of time frames in 2020, and I think that's one of the challenges. And as I said, when you look at where we're at, like the super wealthy and the super persuasive, it's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky because if you want to have a conversation with a broader community about what is the truth, that's going to be a a tricky territory to navigate, in my view. But anyway.
Yeah, I created this word you saw in the video, enoughness.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I actually haven't Googled it to see if it does exist, but it certainly explains what I think we're saying is enoughness. And I think that just deals with basically what we need, and as opposed to being greedy. And but coming back to talk about your point now of the fake news and the belief, I think strongly it stems from people not evolving through, let's say, a skill, any sort of skill, feeling good about that skill, feeling proud that they've now learned and they can produce an article that somebody else can use, like making shoes or carpentry or whatever. Then I think their mind evolves. So I think they won't then tend to be so much of so gullible to mass media. They'll be able to think more for themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, they to do the work that they did, they needed to have a degree of being able to analyze and problem solve. And you take that, and it is a learned skill. There's no doubt about that. If you take that ability to analyze and problem solve and research away, and if you just believe what's being flashed in front of you in 20 and 30-second grabs, it's dangerous territory, isn't it? So it really is.
Yeah. So you can't in the whole transfer, you can't take away the mass media. Okay. All you can do is try and awaken or make the individual aware of what is going on in order for him to start thinking about what we're talking about. Okay. And I think that's, for me, is, as an individual, where we can influence people, okay, in our own way, because we're not in the league of the Bill Gateses and the others. So that will, I think, destroy itself. That we're talking about the pre 2020 type attitude, economies, work, and consumerism.
I think you're right. I think because the way I would characterize it is we're not there telling people what the truth is. Hopefully what we're doing is we're giving them a set of tools to work out what the truth is. See, I'm not there advocating, like I'll make some predictions, obviously looking forward, but I'm not there advocating this is what we must do, because we can only do it together. I mean, I love that little sign-off catch cry that you have. And it is about doing things together. It's not about me preaching to the world, and we don't do that. We're there sort of saying you need a toolkit where you can make sense of this swirling, complex world in which we now live. And technology, if it's used within a certain way, will enhance that. But if you do things, in effect, in a destructive way, and technology will enable you to be very destructive, compared to 1965, when the most destructive thing is that Bob got a bruised ego and walked home with his head down, and you felt good about the vitriol that you just imposed on him. But I'm probably doing a disservice to you too, because you probably never did that. But anyway. So
Yeah,
I think that's a really, like for me, I think that's a really important context, because we are in the age where, you know, people do need a toolkit to discern truth and falsehood, you know, and it can be darn tricky, because look at science fiction movies these days, you know. I mean, you can sit in a cinema and it can be that realistic, you know, that it's where that it's true, rather than a product of someone's imagination.
So coming to the point of what you suggested of how to transform the existing to the new, in the way that you do, you can bring it down into, rather than one page, can you bring it down to one sentence? Sort of, what is that transfer? And over and above everything we've said in this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I tried to capture it as to what is the single message, you know, and the single message, you know, like there's some pretty powerful context that surround and support this. So it's definitely delivered from a point of gratitude, but the single message in terms of the change process, which we haven't really talked about, is thank you for believing in our work and recognizing the importance of what we do together. Together we make the difference. So it's not about, you know, one individual or the 1% of the 1%, which determines what's good for humanity. It really is, you know, an acknowledgement, to use the marketing catch cry around the virus, is we are in all this, you know, we are all in this together. And because we are in this together, we need to recognize our diversity and our differences, and that as we leverage that, if we can get a consensus, and I think it is important to ask permission, if we can get a consensus around, yes, we need to change, and I think the points that you raised is absolutely spot on, to get away from the things that aren't serving us, to build a future that does serve us collectively. And I think, you know, that's, for me, you know, when I really thought about it and agonized over it, and that it really is a statement of gratitude, you know. Thank you for believing in our work and recognizing the importance of what we do together. Together we make the difference. So for me, that's the single message about the change process. It really is, you know.
When you say thank you for believing in our work, what did you have in mind there with the word our?
Well, if you look at it from a business perspective, invariably you'll have people with a range of different roles. So you might have someone who's a cleaner. You might have someone who's a support person. You might have someone who's a production worker. You'll have someone who might be like a marketing specialist or a communication specialist. You'll have a finance person.
So you're saying the consumer is saying that. The consumer is saying to the service provider, thank you for believing in our work. Or is it the service provider saying to the consumer?
All of the above. I think everyone's saying it. Everyone is saying it. Because if you look at one of the changes that is manifested out of the virus, you know, this public outpouring of thanks to first responders and health workers, you know, and even to like cleaners. You know, the work that you are doing is so important to get us through this immediate crisis that we're in. You know, pre-COVID-19, people would look down their nose, oh, you're just a cleaner. You know, you're cleaning toilets and you're cleaning public spaces. You're a nobody, you're a nothing, you're worthless. All of a sudden, the person who's cleaning those public spaces and doing important work to avert the spread of this virus, which is taking lives all around the world, thank you so much for what you're doing, because it is so important. And the same with nursing staff and first responders and all of those people, oh, you're just a nurse. What do you do? Well, hang on a minute. Within the context of where we are right now, what you're doing is like critical to the survival and well-being of the space.
I follow you now. I follow you. I'd like to just, in a way, just be a little devil's advocate, but not directly. I was saying in the video, and you've mentioned it too, that small is beautiful. And today I was being my own devil's advocate, and I was saying, why is small painful? Small is painful, okay? And it links in with what you're saying here now in your single message. Because if you go to the local person to repair the engine of your motor car or something, and you want to support small, and you don't go to the big franchise dealers or whatever they are. You go to the local guy who sweats it out there in dirty overalls day in and day out, and you go to him and he does your work, and then it's not work well done, okay? You've now got to take it to somebody else to actually get the problem solved. So it's not just the essence of small is beautiful, okay? He needs, that single mechanic needs the customer to say, wow, what a fantastic job you did. It was marvelous, okay? I'm going to shout it to the world, okay? And there's a fan that's going to go out for, so it's, I think if you had to say it differently, one would say small, specialized,
trusted.
Anyway, well, trust comes from the outcome of your work. But small, specialized expert, how's that? Small, specialized expert is beautiful, okay? Because now, you take your car to go and have the carburetor only fixed, because he's a carburetor specialist, okay? Now there's nobody on this planet that knows more about all motor cars or certain motor cars carburetors, okay? And you go there trusting that he's the expert, and because you've heard so from other people, he trusts himself as being the expert. There's nothing he hasn't learned and studied and practiced on, and so he's the carburetor expert. So it's beautiful, okay, and very beautiful. Okay, but it's got to be a specialist expert. He can't be a general mechanic for all motor cars, all engines, because he's not going to get that customer saying, wow, okay. He's probably going to get a cheap job, and that's maybe what the customer wanted, was a cheap job, just to get the car back on the road, to sell it or something. Okay. So yeah, that single message for me is important. I think you've hit the nail on the head. So, thank you for believing in our work. Yeah, but thank you for doing a damn good job. Okay. That really, did it. And yeah, not only was the carburetor working so well, but you also took the trouble to clean my engine. Thank you, man. That is marvelous. Okay. And so, and then, of course, it goes on from there. Small is beautiful in that context too. Now, we don't have, let's say, employees working at that garage or employee. Okay, you actually have partners. Okay, that does away with this concept of boss and employee. Okay. And so now, we've got partners in the business and some sort of an agreement, but everybody benefits from that partnership and the money that comes into that business on some agreed way. So that's what I think is where we move into, and those can get bigger. But there'll always be individual partners who specialize in an aspect of whatever it is.
Well, if you point
yeah.
to a model of that might have existed in the past, it was like the old cooperatives. I mean, they tended to operate like that, didn't they? There was a group of people that had products and services and skills and that worked under the cooperative banner, and they could project forward to the broader consumers, this level of expertise in that. But it was done behind the scenes through a cooperative effort of individual businesses or partners that operated under that banner. So, like, there's nothing new under the sun. I think that those sort of things can work, but just obviously updated and obviously using technology tools and things like that.
Yeah, my experience of cooperatives is that they're not a good thing. Okay. We had cooperative farmers, a farmers cooperative, and I never came away from that situation feeling like everybody benefits and everybody's in this. Okay. So I'm not sure if cooperative is the right word. If you had said kibbutz, maybe that might be a whole different situation, or a tribe that has been living somewhere on their own, and
well, I
think
I say that also within the context in which they operated, because if you look at my little history chart, they were operating within typically within an industrial age, where the objective was growth, and the objective was, mass media, and the objective was, national markets, and the objective was extracting value and stuff like that. Whereas if you changed those key contexts, they would operate probably very differently. But I mean, it's sort of a semantics thing in one sense. But I think it's important to sort of say, okay, in my experience, they didn't operate. Yeah, well, that's because the operating environment guided how they operated in many respects, and the thinking priorities of the leaders of those organisations as too. So because it was all about big incomes, cut costs. They were the big motivators, weren't they?
Yeah, I haven't written it down. Well, not here like you have with a single message, but when I reminded myself of Schumacher's "Small is Beautiful," and he's got that subtitle in the heading of his book, and that would be like my single message, and that is, people matter. Okay, so in everything we do, people matter. Okay, as opposed to
true. It's so true. I think you've 100% right. 100% right on that one. If and that's why, like in terms of the context looking forward, it has to serve humanity and living things. Whereas in the past, the mantra was, profit at any cost.
Yeah, and these humans that get in the way with sickness and illness and pregnancies and things and become unproductive, we've got to do away with them.
Exactly, and boy, oh boy, we've just discovered this new technology, and I'm now going to go out there as a business leader and say, with my camel whip, and say, you 5,000 employees, goodbye. Good luck. Good luck with the next stage of your career. Wasn't that the catch cry?
Yeah, absolutely. You think of people like security guards. Okay, robots can replace security guards. Just that so much more easily, and so that's what happened in factories and in all areas, and that's what we've got to be on the lookout for. We've got to make sure that we don't replace. And why not, you might say, as a greedy businessman? The reason is because once you know why we are here on this planet, what is our reason for being here, then you'll understand that the process matters and people matter.
Exactly. So you're guiding your guiding priority is to be of service to humanity and living things. If that's your number one guiding thing, rather than maximizing my profit to me and to my shareholders, then the whole ball game changes. The whole ball game changes, you know.
Yes, and so that's the focus. And you know, and if people don't have some sort of philosophical approach to life, then we need to, you know, make them aware of some ideas that might just make a difference to their quality of life.
And isn't it fascinating? You know, I find it incredible, and it's sort of been really sort of in my face a bit for the last week, because I've been going up to hospital every day, and I'm not picking on doctors, not one iota, but when you look at a lot of these CEOs, okay, they're running their companies, and it's about cut costs and get rid of those people and reduce their wages and outsource and all of those sort of things. And yet those very same people with their big salaries will go home and say, oh, look at me, I've got a worm farm. I'm environmentally responsible, and I give money to these charities, and I've become a card carrier of Greenpeace. And yet the business that he's a leader of could be doing incredible damage to the environment, and yet privately, you know, and the way I'm sort of characterizing, it's almost like to help manage their guilt, they go home and they lead this schizophrenic life. You know, it's all, look at me, and you see it in the politics, you know, like where's the big green supporters from? It's quite often from the wealthy sectors of the community. You know, and you sort of say, well, why is that? Well, why is there so much support, like green voters in blue ribbon seats, you know, in inner suburbs of Sydney or any capital city? Well, you know, that's a good question. Why is it? Is it guilt? You know, you know, and as I said, there's this schizophrenia that you look over here and say, well, what are you doing here? Like, you're not treating people in your own organisations with dignity and respect and valuing their contributions. It's, you know, profit at any cost. You know, it's just bizarre. I find it quite bizarre, you know. So
yeah.
And as I said, you know, when I parked my car there in the hospital, you know, every day for the last, you know, week or so, and there you look at this array of luxury cars, and now electric cars, electric luxury cars, and I'm thinking, and I'm not picking on doctors or anything. I'm just sort of thinking, oh, look at that, look at that. It's just
okay, but let me be the devil's advocate with that one. Okay, I hear you, and I totally agree with you. All right. Now, if you had a doctor call on your house, now you were dying, would you like him to turn up in the latest Mercedes, or an old beat up Volkswagen that hasn't got an exhaust pipe and is dented all over? Which one do you think you'd feel more comfortable coming in to treat you?
It probably wouldn't be a criteria that I'd measure against, as long as he gets there. I think I wouldn't care whether he turned up on a bicycle or a Rolls Royce.
Okay.
But I hear what you're saying, and as I'm not picking on doctors, but I just sort of see it in some of the captains of industry. You just sort of see them, and you know, like for example, the ones that always get me is, and I won't mention names, but from your part of the country, certain people, captains of mining industry there, and we're coming out and we're creating this trust, you know, and we're going to do this for the environment. Well, hang on a minute, what's your business doing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just seems so. Anyway, I better not say too much. I'll find myself.
Especially that we're going to publicise it ourselves.
I'll find myself swinging a pick in Siberia if I'm not careful.
Yeah. Probably a good place to actually stop. I think we've been in a certain direction, and but I think we have been on par Don, to what you wanted, the transfer, because we had to look at what we're transferring from and what we're transferring to. And I think we've done that well in our discussion with our opinions. Your opinion definitely differs from mine, not in contrast, but in just a different approach. And so I think the two together are great.
And I think that very issue is probably a central theme of moving forward, is recognizing different opinions and harnessing the diversity and not forcing change on people, but trying to get a consensus and permission and take them forward together.
And that people matter.
Exactly. The overriding context is we're doing this as a matter of service to humanity. I don't care how many zeros you've got in your bank account. I don't care what sort of car you drive, but at some point, we need to redistribute, the power and the wealth for the benefit of humanity. If you think back, and again, you and I are fortunate because we've lived through it. But if you think back through, the advent of the industrial age, there are certain countries in the world that did extremely well out of it. Like the middle classes all had houses and cars and education and medical treatment. But there are a number of countries on the planet, and you probably spent a fair chunk of your life in one of them, where you could probably argue that they actually went backwards. They were probably worse off through industrialization than they were.
Definitely.
They were at the start of it,
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. And I'm sure I'd be able to dream up some examples, but I think maybe that's for another article or another video. Yeah. Okay, that's really great. So let's digest what we've said today, and let's shall we set ourselves anything? You got some suggestions?
Well, I was just going to suggest that maybe, and you've already done it, so I'll be in a little bit of catch up. But I was just going to suggest that maybe what I need to try and do is just get a couple of 7-minute videos together out of some of these things that we've talked about in the last hour. So.
Okay. Now that would be great. Yeah, I can't get less than 10 minutes. I just talk too much.
Well, maybe we need to round it up to 10 minutes to take the pressure off.
Oh, good. Between 7 and 10.
That's right. Exactly right.
Okay. All right. That's great. But I'll also. I've really enjoyed, like I enjoy every one of our conversations, but I've enjoyed today's, and I want to take a context, not from, basically an idea that has come to mind out of this. Okay, and I want to stay on this trend of people matter, and so I'll also do another 10-minute or so, and get it out. And but before we go, sorry.
No, I think you're spot on. I think the people matter is such an important concept.